Good morning, YouTube. Mr. Gibson guy here, coming to you from my garage in my new home. I haven't done a video in a while. I moved up to Central Florida. I have this nice two-car garage, which is really a one truck and 5 motorcycle garage in my case. But finally getting to put some new videos up. And this one has been a long time in the making. We'll call it the High Performance Mods for the Harley Davidson Sportster. I've been researching this for a long, long time and wanted to get a chance to share all the information that I've gotten about the Sportster and things to make it go. And so now I'm going to share that all with you. Isn't that a good thing? The Sportster, of course, you probably know the basic history. It was first appeared in 1957, 63 years ago, and it's had modifications through the years. Surprisingly, very few modifications, but basically the current day Harley Davidson 2020 is very close to the original 1957 bike. There's been a few changes that have happened. In 1982 they changed to a new frame which was more modern, all steel instead of iron and steel mixed, and gave it much better handling. And then a few years later, in '86, they went to the evolution motor for the Sportster, what Spike calls the best motor Harley Davidson ever made, and he's probably right with that. My Sportster is a 2002. I bought it 7 years ago, and when it was 11 years old, and now it's 18 years old. And going great. The one thing about the Sportster is it is a very tough motorcycle. It is a real tank and almost indestructible. And now we talk about the performance of it. Let me go through a little bit of what we have here. Why do I have a 2002? Why did I buy such an old bike? Well, the Sportster, Harley Davidson, after they changed frames, changed the motor, did a few other things, they really kind of reached the ultimate Sportster that was the best one going. And I'm talking about 883s here. There's 1100s and 1200s also. I'll get to that at the end of this video. See how you're still watching then. But the 883 in 86 had just about reached the pinnacle of development. For the next couple of years, they had to change over to the belt drive and pulleys, replacing sprockets, and change to a 5-speed transmission over the 4-speed that had gone on with for so many years. And it kind of reached the ultimate. Then that bike ran from about 1993 up to 2003. In 2003 or 2004 models, that's when they changed over. They went from the engine in the solid frame to the rubber mount engine. That was to deal with vibration, and some people that just made the Sportster great. But for performance-minded people, that kind of was the beginning of the ruining of the Sportster, because the whole idea with the engine in this all-steel frame as it was designed was that it was a really stable unit and made the bike really handle. And once they rubber mounted the engine, and the engine's flopping around inside the frame, the bike was never going to be as solid as it was with the solid engine mounts. Also, they put on a lot of pounds. Harley had managed to keep 883s comfortably under 500 pounds until they went to the rubber engine mounts and all the extra connections that they had to keep it steady. And so those Sportsters jumped up above 500 pounds. Then again, in 2007, because of EPA regulations, Harley had to go, unfortunately, to fuel injection. They started running the Sportsters very lean. They were running very hot because you didn't have as much gas squirting in to cool the cylinder heads. But it, kept their emissions down lower, and also with the fuel pump and the fuel injection and all of the connections that they had to make that all work, they jumped the Sportster up to over 550 pounds. And when you compare that with the weight of one of these Sportsters from a few years earlier, you take off the heavy exhaust and put on a more performance-oriented, lightweight exhaust, and you're talking about a difference of about 100 pounds. That's a lot of difference in the weight. Now, all the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about can go with 04 and 07 Sportsters and newers all the way up to the latest Sportster. What I'm talking about is my research on which are the Sportsters which can really handle the best and are the best overall performers. And that would have been the 93 to the 03 Sportsters with the tall frame. They don't really call that, I call it the tall frame, but what happened is right after they came out with the Evo, Harley Davidson decided to go for women riders. And so they, of course, didn't mess with the big twin. They went right to the Sportster line, and they started chopping down the forks and the shocks, putting it lower. You went from a 29-inch seat height to a 26-inch seat height, closer to the ground, for people with shorter legs to feel more comfortable riding a motorcycle. What they did with that was they took away a lot of the suspension travel and lowered the bike, made it so you got minimal cornering clearance. The bike, as it originally exists, you can easily crank it over 45 degrees and more, and this bike, the original ones with this frame and with the full suspension, they really could handle leaning way over. Now, it doesn't make any difference in straight line performance, but it makes a whole lot of difference in cornering. Personally, for me, even though, hey, I have a Harley which can lean over as much as this Ducati Hypermotard here. It can, challenge an R6 in the corners. Well, it's heavier, of course, not quite as powerful, but for just a regular bike, you can really get some surprising performance out of a Harley Davidson on these tall frame Sportsters. So, if you want the best in performance potential, you're going to go with an 883 between 93 and 2003 with the tall frame, not a hugger. That's when they started with the huggers. That's when the Sportster started getting its reputation as a girl's bike. And that's a shame because when I started riding motorcycles in '67, when I was first introduced to it, the XLCH Harley 900, as we called it back then, was the super bike. It was the hottest production motorcycle that there was. And so as a kid, it's like, what's the fastest motorcycle? The Sportster. So what's the best motorcycle? The Sportster. And surprisingly, this 2002 model doesn't look much different than a '67. A little bit different, but of course, different engine and different frame, but the appearance, you just say, it's hard to tell. And it's hard to tell all of them until you really know the details on it. All right, so let me get into what the performance mods are that are on this. First of all, the first thing that I did with this first performance mod was I changed the front pulley. The standard 883s have a 27 cog, that's per tooth on the pulley, 27 tooth pulley. The 1100, 1200s have a 29 front cog pulley, front pulley cog. Yeah, whatever. You get the idea. We just call it teeth, can't we? And that makes a difference in the pickup that you get on the bike because when they first came out with the Evo Sportsters, it was 470 pounds and 40 horsepower. So it was a bit anemic feeling. So to jazz it up a little bit, they went to a smaller front sprocket. And that gives you gearing, which is going to get it to jump up a little bit more and be a little bit more peppy. But we're going to be talking about changing cylinders, changing pistons, changing displacement, and basically doubling the horsepower. So you don't really need that. Also, it depends on if you're going to ride a Sportster, you weigh 200 pounds and you have a passenger riding on the back, yeah, your 883 is going to need that 27-tooth front sprocket. But I'm 5'9", 165 pounds, and I was never comfortable on it. When you get up to 65, it feels like it's just, it's just screaming. And then you're on 65 and everybody's flying past you. So, 27-tooth, 883, 29-tooth, 1200, I went to a 30-tooth cog. And that's a 10% increase in your speed for the RPMs the engine is turning over. Also, if you don't put in the kit to reprogram your speedometer, it's going to be 10% off. So if I'm going 50 miles an hour indicated, I'm really going 55. When I'm going 70, I'm really going 77 on the ground. So you can learn to do that, or you can put in the kit that changes over the way the speedometer works so that it gives you accurate, hopefully, readings of your speed out. But when I'm cruising at 75 miles an hour on this bike now, with this 32, it feels really comfortable. It feels like it's just kind of idling along. And so that's one of the things about the 883s is they're kind of in-town bikes, because when you take it out on the highway and get it up to speed, it just turns over too much. So that sprocket change, or cog change, pulley, is the first thing I would suggest doing. Now, if you're 200 pounds, you might want to go with the 29-tooth, but the 30-tooth for me is fine. All right, that doesn't change the horsepower at all, but it really makes a big difference in the character of the bike. When you get a bike that has all this cornering clearance and really corner and really dive through corners and get out there on the straightaway and run, you really like having some long legs. Since I've finished and been breaking in this bike with the new cylinders and pistons, I haven't done a top speed run to C. I've had it up to 100, but it was just like getting warmed up. Still want to run a lot more, and I'm confident that this will pull. Well, it goes up to 120 on the speedo, so I'm sure it will bury the needle and keep going at this point. So there's a lot more performance available for this. First thing you notice is that I have a Cobra El Diablo 2-in-1 exhaust on this. Also, I have a stock ham can on this, the air cleaner cover, which says 883 Sportster on it. It says 883 on the gas tank. And I haven't, I specifically went for that look on this bike. I didn't want to cover it up. I wanted it to say 883. I pulled up into the Harley dealer last week, and all these guys came around and saw a bike pipe. Hey, you got a nice 883 there. Yeah, it is. Meet you on the road. See what you think about 883. But I've come to the conclusion, following the whole Harley Davidson Sportster lore and attitudes that big twin riders always look down their noses at Sportster riders. Hey, you're riding a girl's bike. Yeah, we'll see about that. But I've found that can be one of the most obnoxious people would be the old guy riding an old Sportster with a pipe on it and thinking he's really bad. So I try to go for the opposite of that. I stay quiet and humble about it, and let the engine speak for itself. When you get out on the road and see what you think of this girl's bike. But this pipe helps a lot with the output, lightens it up a lot. The stock exhaust and headers and everything are really pile on the weight on a bike that needs to lose a little bit of weight. So this goes with the looks that I want and sounds much better. At the end, if I remember, I'll start it up and you can see if the mic on my video camera can tell the difference. Next thing you notice on here is I got these progressive springs on the back. Now these are not anything fancy. The 18-year-old, 17-year-old at the time, springs that were stock on it, they were really shot, and I went with these progressives. Didn't put a lot of money into it. They're the same, they're 14.5 inch, I think. Same height, and they greatly improved the ride. The other thing that you can't see on this bike, and this, as of 2019, last year, just finally became available, is their progressive springs in the forks. Now, Progressive was selling springs for your front forks on your Sportster 04 and above, but you didn't have anything for the older bikes. And so just last year, they finally came out with progressive springs you could put in your front fork on your older Sportster. And as soon as they did that, I ordered those and change out the oil in your fork tubes and put in those new springs, and it makes a huge difference compared to those old worn out springs. And these progressive springs really give you a much better ride and, more importantly, a much better handling in the corners and braking, everything. It'll take out the nosedive. But that's just a tip there. If the things besides horsepower that really change around the character of the bike. So you know that. Now, as far as the engine, have the exhaust, went with the fueling Cabot hydro lifters, which are ball bearing solid lifters that are supposed to be much better on wear and much smoother running. The HP Plus, and it's not very expensive, but those inside those push rod tubes, those lifters can make a lot of difference with your bike. And this has the Daytona Twin Tech ignition kit down here, right above the front cylinder. And very important, you can get away without it, but really makes it, you want performance, is the Mikuni HSR 42 carburetor. Change that over. My bike being old, and if you have a 20-year-old Sportster that's still got its original carburetor, the carburetor wasn't very good. Carburetor shot, it's probably spewing out gas, it's going to be all over your oil tank and everything. Go with the Mikuni. It's not that expensive, and makes a huge difference. And the main thing is that I have, of course, the Hammer Performance 1250 conversion kit. 1250 conversion kit is new cylinders. Show you the other side. New cylinders, new pistons, new brakes, new seals. And you go from 883 cc's to 1250 cc's, which is a big change. Now, I was watching these for a couple of years, deciding I wanted to move up on my Sportster and make a real performer out of it. It was okay for around town, but I really wanted to make it, something that followed the tradition of the original Superbike Sportsters from my youth a long time ago. And you can succeed in doing that. The basic 1250 kit for the Sportster was, for the longest time, listed at $799. You had the deluxe kit that had some more stuff in it, and you were over $1,000. That's when they included an ignition changeover system for it. That Dynajet 2000 or something, I think. But with just just the basic kit. Oh, and what happened was, last year, I think, since Hammer has gone to the 1275 kit, they determined that 1250 kits are kind of old-fashioned. So they started clearing them out. Well, it went down to $549 or $529 or something like that. I found one, and so I picked it up. It was on eBay, but when you go to the page, eBay was listed right to the Hammer site, and it was their own ad. They put it up on eBay, not on their web page, but on eBay you can get it not for $7.99, but for $5.49. So I got the basic kit. Now with the kit on these Sportsters, you do have some adjustment on your stock ignition system. You can advance the ignition to go with the bigger bore, the higher compression pistons, and it'll run and it'll produce more power. But they strongly suggest that you go with the ignition kit, which will improve your power a lot. You can run through stock exhaust, you can run with the stock carbs, but you have to jet out the stock carbs so that it, puts out more fuel because you got bigger cylinders to feed. That's if you want just the most basic thing. But when you go to adding a Mikuni carb, you go with the fancier ignition system, you go with the high intake air intake, air filter, and the high flow exhaust, then what you're looking at with stock heads, maybe polished, and that's about it, on an 883 to 1250 conversion, is you're looking at high 80s, getting close to 90 horsepower, the rear wheel. And so you're coming down basically doubling your horsepower. That's basically what you would do with this. And the good thing about it is that you're not running super high compression. These are 9-to-1 or 10-to-1 pistons. I think they're 9-to-1, might be 10-to-1 in the stock kit. So I run 93 gas, 93 octane. They say you can run 91 octane. I like to put the 93 in it just to be sure. And it never knocks. And you can just putter around the neighborhood if you want to on this bike, or you can pull out on the highway and go flying past everybody. And the bike handles both situations just fine. You can go higher horsepower, but when you do that, you're going to be going to 12-to-1 or 13-to-1 compression pistons. Your bike is going to be it's going to be faster. It's going to be a lot more finicky, but it's not going to like just puttering around if you want to do that. So I went with what, I could have spent another couple $1,000 with stuff. But this is how I ended up with the bike, and I'm comfortable with this, and I'm getting near 90 horsepower, 4.5 pounds, so, under 500 comfortably, and put this Mustang seat on it, which has replaced my other Mustang seat that I had on it before. I like the gunfighter style, a lot cooler looking. But this is the Sportster the way that I liked it. Now, this has been about 883s, and specifically the 93-03. You can do the engine mods on a Sportster hugger, on a newer Sportster, on a fuel-injected Sportster, on a rubber-mounted engine Sportster. You can improve your handling. You can greatly improve your performance. I don't know, maybe some of the air-cooled ones, or maybe some of the fuel-injected bikes can do better than the Mikuni. I don't know. But you get straight-line performance, but if you have a hugger, you're not going to get, you can't just put ground clearance on it. You can't get the pegs higher. That's, limiting with the size of your frame. But you can still make a bike that's going to smoke a lot of other bikes, a lot of big twins are going to be left in the dust by your girl's bike if you want to do that. The 1200 Sportster is another area, because if you already have a 1200 cc Sportster, you're putting out some pretty good horsepower. You got a pretty fast bike, and you can initially look at it and say, how much do I want to spend to increase 25 cc's in each cylinder? What is that worth? Probably not much, but there's more to it than that. As I said, mine is running close to 90 horsepower. That is as much as you're going to do with 883 heads. That's the limiting factor on it. That's as far as you can go. Now, you have an 883 and you put a kit on it, you can do one of two things. You can go directly to Hammer and buy a set of 1200 heads, or you can look around on the used market, go to a scrapyard or something and see if you can find a pair of 1200 heads that you can send off to Hammer, and they will port, respring, revalve, open up. And the secret is that with the 883 heads, you can only handle a small dome piston, which means 9-to-1 or 10-to-1. If you want to use a high dome piston, it won't fit in this head. It'll bang right into your valve. So you have to have 1200 heads, which you can open up and get a lot more flow through. And so if you do an 883, put 1200 heads on it that have been ported and everything, and with the real high compression pistons, you can get up to 100, 110 horsepower. If you go with the 1275 kit, which is something that is a little bit more for you 1200 Sportster guys, get your heads redone, your 1200 heads redone, and go with the 12-to-1 or 13-to-1 compression ratio pistons. You can be putting out 120, 125 horsepower. And remember, a 1200 Sportster basically weighs exactly the same as that 883 Sportster. So I'm real happy with the performance on, about 90 horsepower on my 883. Just imagine what you could do with your same weight 1200 and 125 horsepower at the rear wheel. That is you are going to be the mortal enemy of all the Ducatis in your neighborhood with a 1200 like that. So that's what I have to say about hopping up the Sportster. It's if you are a real big person, real tall person, you might not be comfortable even on a high frame Sportster, but people that are not giants can be very comfortable on them. I like being a Harley rider, but not a big twin rider, and somebody who is not going to be shamed by any big twin out there. So this bike has a lot of history to it. It looks vintage, but I think the Sportster just looks bad. All right, that's all I have for you on this video. Go out and find yourself a Sportster and be a Mr. Gibson Guy out.